The committee meets today to consider the nomination of Admiral Christopher Grady to be Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Thank you, Admiral, for your continued service and willingness to lead in this important position. And I'd also like to welcome your wife, Christine. We are grateful to your family for their sacrifice and continued support of your service to the nation. You have served most recently as the commander of Fleet Forces Command, which included responsibility for STRATCOM's sea-based leg of the nuclear triad. That experience, along with your distinguished career of service across multiple theaters and command at all levels, will serve you well in this new role. I would also like to note that you were born in Newport, Rhode Island, and are a native of Middletown, Rhode Island, which makes this a very pleasant experience. And as we consider this nomination, we must keep in mind that the United States is engaged in a strategic competition with China and Russia. These near-peer rivals do not accept U.S. global leadership or the international norms that have helped keep the peace for the better part of a century. This strategic competition is likely to intensify due to shifts in the military balance of power and diverging visions of governance between China and Russia and the West. This competition is also unfolding amidst a global pandemic, climate change, and the emergence of highly disruptive technologies. Further, the Defense Department must continue to recruit and retain high-caliber individuals while restoring readiness and pursuing new high-end capabilities for the force. The interconnected nature of these challenges will drive how the Department and the military services adapt to achieve their missions. Admiral Grady, if confirmed as Vice Chairman, you will be working closely with the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, to address each of these issues, and I hope you will share your views on them with the committee. In addition, as Vice Chairman, you will serve a key role in the interagency process that often requires working closely with senior policymakers within the Department and at the National Security Council on critical national security issues. In light of the strategic challenges I referenced earlier, the committee looks forward to hearing your thoughts on the effectiveness of the interagency process. Finally, the Vice Chairman is assigned a number of specific responsibilities within the Department. First, the Vice Chairman oversees the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, the JROC, which reviews requirements for acquisition programs to ensure they are reasonable and necessary. Second, as a senior member of the Nuclear Weapons Council, the Vice Chairman plays a central role in ensuring the U.S. safely maintains its nuclear weapons stockpile. Lastly, the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the Vice Chairman often partner to lead the Department in addressing policy challenges that require the integration of civilian and military expertise and perspective. I look forward to hearing how you will prioritize and execute each of these critical functions if confirmed as the Vice Chairman. Thank you again for your willingness to serve our nation, and I look forward to your testimony. And now let me recognize the ranking members that are in hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Grady, thank you for your decades of standing watch over our security and for your continued willingness, as well as your family's willingness to continue your service in this direction. For the past 3 years, this committee has used the 2018 National Defense Strategy to help guide our oversight and legislative direction. And I always like to comment that this is something that works. So many things don't work around here, but this does. It started off with equal representation, Democrats, Republicans, and has been a great guide for us. China continues to modernize its military at an alarming pace. On November 15th, Russia tested an anti-satellite missile, shattering a satellite into 1,500 pieces of lethal debris that made astronauts scramble for safety. Even more dangerously, Russia is postured to attack Ukraine in what could be the largest invasion we've seen since World War II. We've got to provide lethal assistance to Ukraine now to deter a Russian attack. Every day President Biden waits, he makes an attack more likely. Finally, the administration added to the problem with the botched evacuation of American citizens and allies from Afghanistan that we still recall, we remember, and we regret. This disaster shatters U.S. credibility and determines the trust of partners and allies, the same partners and allies who are supposed to be our biggest advantage over adversaries. And while the world gets more dangerous, the administration foolishly wants to cut defense spending. Thankfully, this year's NDAA, with its great success, I have to say, last night in the House, is bringing this back where it should be. Admiral Grady, you'll be critical to helping this nation maintain an effective nuclear deterrent and accelerate adoption of advanced technology like the hypersonic weapons, advanced materials, and artificial intelligence to meet warfighting requirements. It's very rare, and the American people are now catching on that we are not in a position to be the number one in everything anymore, as it was ever since World War II. So I consider ourselves right now, as I've mentioned to you, Admiral, to be in the greatest threatened position that we've been in as a nation. So you got your work cut out for you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe. Admiral Grady, you're recognized for your statement.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Reed, Ranking Member Inhofe, and distinguished members of the Senate Armed Services Committee, good morning to you all. It's a great honor to appear before you today as President Biden's nominee to assume the duties as the 12th Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I want to thank the President, Secretary Austin, Chairman Milley, Secretary Del Toro, CNO Gilday for their trust and confidence. I think it's important that I also recognize General Hyten and his wife, Laura, for their extraordinary service to our nation and to our service members and to their families. I'd also like to acknowledge the passing of your colleague, a great American senator, Senator Dole, and really to acknowledge his military service in support to our nation as a member of the greatest generation. And of course, I want to thank all of you for your stalwart support for our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines, our Coast Guardsmen, and our Guardians who defend our nation at home and abroad, far forward, around the world every day. Joining me today is my wife, Christine, who has been my partner and my confidant and my rock since I was an ensign. She has been the model of family and service and strength. Service and strength to those families, to the communities we serve, and indeed to the nation. And I would say that Christine is also the singular reason that our three sons, Nick, Luke, and Paul, who could not join us today, are indeed the men that they are, men in whom I am very proud, and men who always step up to their responsibilities as sons, husbands, and citizens. I firmly believe that family readiness directly contributes to operational readiness. I've always said that a stronger family means a stronger fleet, and after 37 years of service, I can confidently say that it is because of our families and their service and their sacrifice that we continue to be the most powerful military the world has ever known. I truly appreciate this committee's leadership in this new era of strategic competition in an extraordinarily complex and dynamic environment where we are faced with overt challenges to the international rules-based order and our national security in every domain, from the seabed to the space to cyberspace, the land domain, the air domain, and all. In this, we compete alongside our allies and partners every day in a multi-world, a world that is multi-regional, multilateral, multi-domain, multi-vector, multi-phase, multi-level, and multi-authority. And it is the speed of information, the arsenals of sophisticated asymmetric, conventional, and nuclear weapons, and the destructive ability of our competitors to attack below the threshold of armed conflict that have changed the character of that competition. And so now, more than ever, global integration is essential, and integrated deterrence in those multi-domains, leveraging all elements of national power across the whole of government and with our allies and partners is absolutely critical. And here I would say that there is no such thing as a fair fight. Our competitors are moving fast, and we must move faster. I have always viewed things through two lenses in my 37 years, the fleet and the foundry. The fleet is the fight and how we integrate into the joint force, and the foundry is what enables that fight. and I believe that speed and urgency are required in both. And we will get faster by leveraging our competitive advantages. First, our unrivaled industrial base that I believe truly is born of our innovative and open society. Secondly, our many allies and partners with whom we are stronger together. And third, our servicemen and women who are always resolute, ready, and lethal on arrival. They truly are the center of the universe. So if confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee and the Congress, senior leadership in the Department of Defense, the interagency team, industry, and our allies and partners to ensure the center of the universe never goes into a fair fight. Once again, I am grateful for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. Admiral, I have a series of questions that are required for all senior nominees. Please respond appropriately. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes, Senator.
Have you assumed any duties or taken any actions that would appear to presume the outcome of the confirmation process?
No, Senator.
Exercising our legislative and oversight responsibilities makes it important that this committee, its subcommittees, and other appropriate committees of Congress receive testimony, briefings, reports, records, and other information from the executive branch on a timely basis. Do you agree, if confirmed, to appear and testify before this committee when requested?
Yes, Senator.
Do you agree, when asked before this committee, to give your personal views, even if your views differ from the administration?
Yes, sir.
Do you agree to provide records, documents, and electronic communications in a timely manner when requested by this committee, its subcommittees, or other appropriate committees, and to consult with the requester regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such records?
Yes, Senator.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established by this committee for the production of reports, records, and other information, including timely responding to hearing questions for the record?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes, sir.
Will those witnesses and briefers be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, Admiral. Admiral, you're assuming a tremendously important role, if confirmed, in our Defense Department. One of the significant roles is the chair of the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, which will put you in a position of help us deliver rapidly the most appropriate new weapon systems for the forces. And as we discussed during the office call, JROC sometimes is subject to parochialism, that it's a service ratification rather than a joint analysis of what is available and what should be available to all the services. And if confirmed, what actions will you take to ensure that the joint view overcomes the parochial view?
Yes, sir. The JROC is one of the key mechanisms and duties that I will fulfill if confirmed as the vice chairman. And I believe it is perhaps one of the most important things that happens in the Pentagon. And building on the momentum set by my predecessors, especially General Selva and General Hyten, I think that the key to the JROC is that it is threat and risk-based, and that we move beyond validating, as you say, a certain system, but addressing threat and risk-based gaps to ensure that the best system is brought forward and not necessarily the best widget. And so if we go from a threat-based perspective to close those gaps, and then we work to go faster, I think we will achieve the true potential of the JROC.
In that regard, the services have obviously interests that they zealously guard. How will you sort of litigate or mediate between the service chiefs?
Sir. Well, I think it's going to be fact-based and data-based. And so we will, if confirmed, making sure that the JROC operates on a disciplined and analytical basis to bring the data to the table that says this is the right decision or not. But certainly important dialogue with the services via the vice chiefs in the JROC process will be important so that I understand all of those various perspectives. But it has to be data informed.
Thank you. Acquisition programs sometimes fail due to requirements that are technically unachievable at any reasonable cost or timeline. And other programs have requirements that don't appreciate commonly understood advances in global commercial technology. And then there's always a tendency to build a Swiss Army knife when a simpler blade would be appropriate. If confirmed, what steps do you take to ensure that requirements for new systems are technically realistic and also push the envelope forward but are technically realistic?
Yes, sir. If confirmed, having a broader understanding of the wider possibilities that the technology database can provide us will be important. And so those relationships with the defense industrial base would be important, not just at my level, but I believe through the vice chairman, the vice chiefs of each of the services and throughout the larger apparatus of the Pentagon. The JROC will help with that, as will other mechanisms within the JROC process that allow us to cast that wide net to ensure that we have the systems that we need and that we get past just sticking with an existing widget. I think also, too, you mentioned a great point about simplicity. We do have a tendency to Christmas tree things a little bit too much. And so simplicity can be sublime in many perspectives from a technology perspective. We should look for that.
And then a related question is, as the system is being developed, there's also a tendency for sort of a creep in major acquisition programs where they try to do more than they were even intended to do. How will you look and guard that?
Sir, this gets straight to the disciplined process that the JROC has to ensure. And so strong leadership in the JROC in consultation with my colleagues on the panel has to ensure a very disciplined approach to that so that we don't get that mission creep, which becomes very parochial at sometimes as you move forward.
And one, at least perspective on the future is that the real differential will come with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, not simply the physical platform. And do you anticipate being able to develop platforms that can quickly adapt to changing software, changing aspects of this quantum and AI world?
Yes, sir. I think that's going to be an important element of any new system that we bring to the table, that ability to get past a very hardware-oriented weapon system development to one that is software-oriented, such that you can have we'll say the mainframe, if you will, but then spin in new technologies in an app-based approach, which will allow us to get to the speed that I think we all want in our weapon system acquisition process.
Thank you very much, sir. Senator Inhofe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just get a couple of things on the record, and I already know the answer to this, and I think most people do here also, but it's important that we, I think, get it down at the very beginning so there's no misunderstanding. Our nuclear modernization, this goes back to General Hyten, a quote that he had. He said, "I look at our nuclear capabilities. Our triad, our modernization program, are the minimum essential capabilities required to defend this nation. We have to defend against the most existential threat, and Russia and China and their capabilities are very important. So to me, those are the minimum essential capabilities that we have to build. And even at the highest rate, it'll still be just roughly 6% of the overall defense budget. I think we can afford that security. So I will ask you the question just to get you on the record and saying that we know the answer anyway, and that is General Hyten, that the most modernizing each, was talking about modernizing each leg of the U.S. nuclear triad and the National Nuclear Security Administration, NNSA, nuclear weapons complex is a critical national security priority. Do you agree?
Senator, I do. A modernized and fully ready nuclear deterrent is one of the #1 priorities of the department, and if confirmed, I would seek to ensure that.
And I know you will. And however, that has become somewhat controversial in the past. We have to know where we're coming from. And lastly, I would ask is it your intention to continue General Hyten's efforts to reform the JROC process to move faster and adopt advanced technologies that help meet warfighting requirements. I know that you have responded to a discussion of this with our chairman, but I'd like to get your assurance as to what you will do with JROC.
Sir, the efficacy of the JROC and the momentum that it is on now is extremely positive. And if confirmed, it would be my goal to bend the curve and to go even faster, to focus on the threat and the risks, to close those gaps, and to move as quickly as possible to get the tools to the center of the universe, our warfighters, as fast as possible.
Excellent, and I know that's true. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Nero. Senator Shaheen, please.
Thank you, Admiral Grady. Thank you for your service and your wife and your family's service as well. And congratulations on your nomination. I look forward to working with you if confirmed. You have served as commander of the Navy's Sixth Fleet, which is responsible for naval activities in Europe. And so I know that you've been witness to Russia's increasing aggression in the Black Sea and other areas of Europe. I know that the unclassified Global Posture Review for Europe emphasized a combat-credible deterrent against Russia and enabling NATO forces to operate more effectively. Now, I'm pleased that the Biden administration has removed the cap on forces in Germany, active duty forces, and it's committed to maintaining a presence in Europe. But as I talk to some of our European allies, one of the things they have been pressing for is more U.S. forward deployed troops in Europe. Do you think that's something we should be considering now, and how do you view that in the long term?
Yes, Senator. I think our posture and presence in Europe is very, very important. And we should listen to our allies and partners insofar as we want to work with them and be stronger together. And so I think as part of the Global Posture Review, it's important that we balance all of those requirements and where we need to operate. I know I would tell you that as the Sixth Fleet Commander, you mentioned my very best day was when I had a ship in the High North, a ship in the Baltic, a ship in the Black Sea, a ship in the East Med, and on a really good day, I may have had one in the Gulf of Guinea. That's challenging, as you know, but that gives the President and the Secretary of Defense many options to work with our allies and partners and to pursue our objectives with NATO and in Europe.
Thank you. As you know, we have a Women, Peace, and Security Act that has been in the process of being implemented since it was signed in 2017. As you think about your experience, how have you seen women's participation in the military positively affect what our goals are, particularly in places where it is women like the Middle East, where women are very important as we're talking to populations in communities that are reluctant to speak with men?
Yes, ma'am, a very important issue. I think a very important issue that advances the cause of democracy, too. My own personal experience, first within the Navy, my first ship, the USS Cole, was an integrated ship. I can just offer to you that having 51% of the brains eligible to serve in the military for us really helped make the Navy better. And I think that idea that we can bring everyone to the table, especially our mothers, our daughters, and our sisters going forward, just makes us stronger. And so the initiative that you spoke of is one worthy of support.
Well, as you know, most regional and functional combatant commands have hired full-time gender advisors to integrate gender perspectives into our planning. And I just wondered, if confirmed, how will you implement women, peace, and security within the Joint Staff?
Yes, thank you. The role of a gender advisor is a way to attack a very significant issue, and if confirmed, I look forward to leveraging those advisors who can make me think better and smarter about the issues that you raise. So I look forward to, if confirmed, understanding that ecosystem and helping advance that cause going forward. Again, we want to bring everybody to the table, get the advantage of all of their thinking, And it's also part of creating that safe and secure work environment for all of our sailors and soldiers, airmen, Marine, Coast Guard, and Guardians.
Thank you. I would argue that it's important to our mission wherever we're operating in the world as well. And I will look forward to talking to you a year from now to hear what you've done to implement the act within the Joint Staff. I want to raise another concern about what's happening with ISIS. The headlines, ISIS has faded from the headlines, and yet we know we have several very large camps that continue to be in Syria and Iraq that have women and children who are detainees from the war against ISIS and who have the potential to be radicalized and create a further issue with terrorists in the future. What's the military's role, or does the military have a role in supporting folks in these camps, and what should we be thinking about as we're looking at the future of places like Al-Hol, which has 94% of its occupants are women and children, but we know they're already becoming radicalized?
Yes. The issue of ISIS as an example of violent extremist organizations is one we never can take our eye off the ball. It's one in which if we beat them here, they're going to squeeze and pop out some over here, and we're going to have to continue to beat them. So the military piece of it is reactive in some respects, but it can also help create the conditions on the ground for better conditions and to help with those conditions that will not allow radicalization to continue. So I think the military has a role in that. We need to beat them first, and we do that, and then help create those conditions on the ground that are safe and secure such that radicalization doesn't occur.
Thank you. My time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sheen. Before I recognize Senator Fisher, since a quorum is now present, I ask the committee to consider 3 civilian nominations and a list of 1,772 pending military nominations. First, I ask the committee to consider the nominations of Mr. John B. Sherman to be Chief Information Officer of the Department of Defense, Mr. Ashish S. Vazirani to be the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness, and Ms. Carrie F. Ritchie to be General Counsel of the Department of the Army. Is there a motion to favorably report these nominations to the Senate? All in favor say aye. Aye. The motion carries. Finally, I ask the committee to consider a list of 1,772 pending military nominations. Of these nominations, 21 nominations are 1 day short of the committee's requirement that nominations be in committee for 7 days before we report them out. No objection has been raised to these nominations. I recommend the committee waive the 7-day rule in order to permit the confirmation of these nominations before the Senate recesses for the holiday recess. Is there a motion to favorably report this list of 1,772 pending military nominations to the Senate?
So moved.
All in favor say aye. Is it? The motion carries. Senator Fisher, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Admiral, to you and your wife this morning. I appreciate the discussion that you and I had earlier about the importance of modernizing our nuclear enterprise, and that you view nuclear deterrence as the department's highest priority, which you reaffirmed today to the ranking member. We are seeing Russia and China continue to expand their arsenals. Russia is pursuing a variety of novel nuclear systems, and China is conducting a strategic breakout that the current STRATCOM commander, Admiral Richard, characterized as breathtaking. What is your view of China's nuclear expansion, and what implications do you think that this has for us?
I think that China's breakout, as Admiral Richard has called it, is indeed spectacular. And indeed breathtaking. And so therefore, we need to be postured to address that issue. We need to think about how we would proceed with deterrence, particularly deterrence now against 2 peer competitors and who need to be deterred in 2 different ways. And deterrence then, I think, builds on that strong nuclear triad that we just talked about. And so the modernization of the nuclear triad will be the underpinning of that deterrence effort against two nuclear competitors.
Overall, do you believe that the growth of Russian and Chinese nuclear arsenals reinforces the need to modernize our nuclear deterrent, including each leg of the triad?
Absolutely, I do, Senator. And we need to have that responsive, flexible, and survivable triad across the three legs if we're going to meet the challenges of two nuclear peer competitors.
You know, we continue to hear calls to pause or to defer modernization programs despite repeated testimony from STRATCOM commanders and others that there is no room for additional delay. Last year, Admiral Richard testified that, quote, many of the modernization and sustainment efforts necessary to ensure deterrence viability have zero schedule margin and are late to need, end quote. Can you give us your view of the modernization schedule? I know you're particularly familiar with the need to replace the Ohio-class submarine.
Yes, ma'am. I agree with Admiral Richard in that there is no more margin to surge. Service life extension programs across the nuclear triad kind of tapped that ability out now, and so now it's time to move forward. Speaking to the Ohio-class submarine, we have service life extended them, I think, to the extent now where it would be a challenge to do it any further. Just look at hull strength as an example. We can't go past the physics of metallurgy at some point. So at any rate, I think if you look at just the Ohio-class SSBN as an example, there's no more margin left in terms of service life extension.
Senator King and I, along with Senator Shaheen, we were at Minot earlier this year, and we looked at the maintenance work that has to be done on the 1970s era ICBMs that we have. These are remarkable systems. They have lasted a long time, but as you just referenced with submarines, things don't last forever. When you hear about the GBSD program and the fact that it is important to continue that, the fact that study shows it is cheaper to have GBSD than the current Minuteman program that we have. Does that just reinforce your position on that leg of the triad, or do you think it needs to be studied even further?
Well, first of all, thanks for going out and visiting the airmen out at
Great guys,
Right.
great people.
And their ability to maintain that system and have it at peak operational readiness really does speak to the center of the universe that we talked about. But I do believe that as we think about GBSD and the timeline there, at a certain point, it costs more to maintain than it does to remodernize, and we're approaching that.
I think this last study showed that we have approached it. It's $38 billion cheaper to go with GBSD than to try and extend the life of the Minutemen. Thank you.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Blumenthal, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral, for your service and your family as well. And thanks for the conversation we had not long ago. And I am delighted that you share my commitment to making sure that we maintain our superiority in undersea warfare, and that we continue not only with the Ohio-class replacement now being built at Electric Boat, the Columbia-class, but also the Virginia-class attack submarine, 2 submarines a year, which is vital to maintain that superiority. And I hope you continue to agree and perhaps visit Electric Boat.
Senator, I certainly do agree. As we look across all of the domains, the undersea domain is one that I think we still have a significant superiority in, and we want to maintain that and maybe even build it even better. I have been to Electric Boat several times, both in Quonset Point and in Connecticut, and it's spectacular what that defense industrial base can do, and I applaud the efforts of the folks at Electric Boat for what they're doing.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about a topic that may not be covered by anyone else here, the Afghanistan evacuation and settlement efforts, which very much involve the military. Although we have no military presence in Afghanistan, there are somewhere between 30,000 and 50,000 guests, as they're called now, on our military bases. I recently visited Quantico, Virginia. The United States Marine Corps is doing an excellent job. I'm really so much in admiration of the work that they are doing there, and I'm sure the other branches of service at our other bases. But these bases were supposed to be closed literally this week, and they're going to continue into February, March, perhaps beyond, because of the insufficient support for the resettlement efforts. And fortunately, we will see more resources going into it. But I'm also concerned about the evacuation of our at-risk Afghan allies, interpreters, translators, security guards, drivers, all the people who stood by us and helped protect our troops, and diplomats. I've called for an evacuation czar because I've found that there was and remains a lot of insufficient coordination, even finger pointing. Could you give me your views on whether we should be doing more, as I believe, to help with evacuation efforts through charter flights and resources that the United States still has there, even though we have no military or diplomatic presence?
Thank you, Senator. I think, first, thanks for going down to Quantico and seeing the team down there. They are doing really good work, and I think it's that type of work under General Van Herk's leadership is one of the things that the military does very well, logistics and movement and that kind of thing. And so if confirmed, I would look forward to working with General Van Herk to finish that mission. As to your point of folks that may be at risk still on the ground, if confirmed, I would look forward to working with the CENTCOM commander on what are the right ways to finish that mission as well. And it would be an important element of our discussions on going forward and concluding finally what we're doing in that part of the world with Afghanistan.
I think you've put it really correctly, that it is a matter of completing the mission and honoring our commitment for men and women and their families who put their lives on the line, and now they have targets on their back because they sided with us in that conflict. So I hope to continue working with you. Finally, let me just ask your views on classification. Yesterday, I joined my colleagues in a classified briefing on the Ukraine situation. Obviously, we can't talk about it in this setting, except to say it was deeply sobering, maybe scary is the right word for it. And my feeling was, after hearing that briefing, as it is so often after such classified briefings, that the American people should hear what we heard. And for much of what was said in that briefing, it could be told to the American people without compromising sources or methods or other kinds of necessary assets or resources. I think there's too much classification, in short. Do you have a view on that point?
Sir, thanks. And we talked a bit about that in the phone call. And I would say that in general, we tend to overclassify and that we should work harder not to. But I think there's several good reasons for that. One is the transparency that we have with the citizens that we serve to explain what we're trying to do. Secondly, is being able to work with our allies and partners, as an example. My Second Fleet commander, his deputy is a Canadian officer, and sometimes I have to ask him to leave when we are talking about what we're doing in the Atlantic. And so we're working very hard to overcome those barriers. And I think the third reason is that type of classification, when things are overclassified, prevents us from integrating and synchronizing better because there are artificial barriers that we put up in our way. So in the end, I think we need to work hard to always push that down, the classification down, but still remaining sensitive to sources and methods that you correctly point out. And thank you for taking that brief. It is indeed sobering.
Thank you, Admiral Grady.
Sir.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. Senator Rounds, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, I enjoyed visiting with you a few weeks ago in my office, and I thank you and your family for 37 years of faithful service to our country, and I appreciate your willingness to continue to serve in this very critical position. One of the items that we discussed at that time was your perspective on the principal cyber advisor positions that Congress has required in the last year's NDAA. And I appreciated hearing how much you valued having an independent subject matter expert with no day-to-day management responsibilities who, in your words, could speak truth to power regarding cyber activity throughout the departments. And I thank you for that, sir. On a related topic, and I think this is something that we don't spend enough time discussing and making clear, the Vice Chairman now leads the Joint Staff's Electromagnetic Spectrum Operations Cross-Functional Team and is the senior designated official for electromagnetic spectrum operations in the Department of Defense. That is a very valuable asset. A number of senators came together during the development of the bipartisan infrastructure bill to literally block efforts to provide critical electromagnetic spectrum for auction, meaning taking it out of the Department of Defense's perspective and putting it up for sale. So far, a number of us have succeeded, but there have been additional legislative threats to DoD's spectrum in the 3100 to 3450 megahertz band. The reason why I ask this question is I think it's important if you could share with this committee in this recognizable, unclassified forum how you would view an attempt to auction spectrum in this band with respect to maintaining the capabilities that keep this country safe every day, recognizing a lot of people out there think that spectrum should be made available for telecommunications for everybody, and yet it is critical that the Department of Defense maintain a certain amount of this spectrum in a very, very specified area. Can you give us your views on that and how you would go about sharing with other members of the United States Senate and House how critical this is?
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I very much enjoyed that discussion. We talked a little bit about this. The management of electromagnetic spectrum to the Department of Defense is absolutely critical. We operate in there. We have critical activities that we do within that spectrum and within that domain. I think what you want from us, sir, is to be able to come forward to you and lay out the risks and the challenges of sell-off. And to do it in a data-based and in threat-based way so that we go into that very significant policy decision well-informed as to the challenges and risks that it might impose on our sailors and the center of the universe and the soldiers and airmen and that going forward. So we need to bring to you the arguments for or against, pros and cons, so that we can make a very threat-based, informed discussion. It's a significant issue, though, for sure.
One of the challenges, I think Senator Blumenthal mentioned it, is the overclassification of information. Would you commit to providing a classified brief to the members of this committee and members of other key committees to discuss the danger of taking such actions without a very stringent approval process?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Regarding the revision of the National Defense Strategy, I wonder if you could comment on the force sizing construct. Two major planning assumptions have been overcome by events, and now they seem to be critically flawed. The force sizing construct to fight one war at a time, and the planning and investment in capabilities geared for short wars. I know this strategy was driven by affordability, but in my view, this probably does not make strategic sense now, given the activity, investments, and behavior of China and Russia. How do you see this issue?
I think as we look forward to that force sizing construct that you call out, it has to be one that is informed by current conditions and current threats. So if confirmed, I would look forward to being a part of that part of that discussion. But certainly the world gets a vote, the enemy gets a vote, and how we look forward to sizing the force. It will be a balance of capability and capacity. It will be a balance of being there when we need to be there. So we need to bring all of those things together based on the current situations and indeed the projected situation that we see in the future.
Thank you. Well, Admiral, the position that you have been nominated for is critical, and it is time sensitive that we move forward in filling this position. I think you're the right person for the job. I look forward to supporting your nomination, and I would hope, Mr. Chairman, that we're able to move forward as quickly as possible in filling that position.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Kane, please.
Chair. Admiral, congratulations to you, and I'll just tell my colleagues, the Grady family is very beloved in Hampton Roads, Virginia. They're currently on their third posting into Norfolk. And, I very much appreciate your long service. Also to tell my colleagues, if you read his biography, something really sticks out. He's the recipient of the Old Salt Award. I didn't know what that was, but I was intrigued, and I researched it. The Old Salt Award in the Navy is the award given to the longest-serving surface warfare officer. And he inherited that when Admiral Davidson retired. So that's just an additional tribute to the years of service and your longevity in serving the country. Admiral Grady, Senator Wicker and I, we've been engaged in a months-long debate with the DOD about moving forward with block buy of the LPD and LHA amphibious ships. This block buy was authorized by the FY21 NDAA and also by the Defense Appropriations Bill. As you know, block buy provisions often yield significant savings in the past, but the Department has stalled on the block buy and cited a desire to, quote, undertake an additional study of amphibious ship requirements. Senator Wicker and I asked the Marine Corps if their amphibious ship requirements have changed in recent months, and we were told that they had not. So I'm a little bit unclear what agency is participating in this review. As we continue to study the requirement that the Marine Corps states has not changed, China is moving forward with the construction equivalent of a class of warships similar to the LPD and LHA, Type 71 and 75 classes respectively. So at least China believes that this class of warship isn't obsolete. In your current role as Fleet Forces Command, have you been involved in any recent studies on the number or overall requirements for the LPD and LHA amphibious ships? And are you aware of any developments that would suggest we halt or slow construction of this class of amphibious ship?
Sir, a couple issues there. The first is the block buy is a really efficient way to generate that demand signal to the defense and industrial base, and as you say, is a very efficient way to go. So I thank the committee's support for that. Amphibious warships and the renaissance that's underway in amphibious warfare now is growing and palpable, and so the naval integration between what the Commandant and the CNO are trying to do has a lot of momentum right now going forward. Those are great ships that you talk about. They do provide amazing capability and capacity to the fleet commanders and to the combatant commanders going forward. I think the level of discussion right now between the CNO and the Commandant, of course I wouldn't want to speak with them, but if confirmed would like to be part of that dialogue. But I think the discussion there is how do we take that all the tenets of naval integration and push forward, particularly as we bring our Marines out of the desert and bring them back aboard ships. And what will that look like? What is the force what are we going to force generate going forward? And this question about how many amphibs that we need, particularly the big decks, will be essential to part of that. So if confirmed, look forward to being a participant in that discussion.
I look forward to working with you on that one. Your role as Vice Chairman has a lot of different important components, and one is you had the Council on Oversight of the National Leadership Command Control and Communications, or NC3, and that's commonly referred to as the fourth leg of the nuclear triad. Have you participated in exercises using the NC3 system, and give us your assessment on its, is it robust enough, or do we need to do more to make that system robust, protected against cyber attacks, et cetera?
Yes, Senator. I do agree that the NC3 could be very well considered the kind of the fourth leg of the triad. As you know, I am the Navy's component to STRATCOM, so all of the SSBNs and the take charge and move out aircraft work for me, and so I'm very, very involved in the NC3 dialogue and discussion that is going forward. Just 2 weeks ago, I concluded my 6th Global Lightning, Global Thunder exercise, in which we exercise NC3 across the nuclear triad. I think I agree with the STRATCOM commander, and if confirmed, would look forward to working with him and the DepSecDef for that matter on this issue. And that is that across the 200 or so systems that we have, it's working, but it could be better. But it is safe, secure, and reliable now, but we need to think about taking it into the future against the threats in all domains, including cyber. And so, again, if confirmed, I would look forward to working with DepSecDef and the STRATCOM commander to ensure that happens.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Cotton, please.
Admiral, welcome, and thank you for almost 4 decades of service to our nation. As you know, based on our conversation, before your hearing, I'm very concerned about the military's culture and what I see as a lack of focus on warfighting. The state of professional military education is one of my top concerns. In September, 2 War College professors wrote an op-ed in City Journal that said, quote, "War colleges no longer teach warfighting." This is consistent, unfortunately, with cautions I've heard from field grade officers and War College students who warn that war colleges care more about academic accreditation and growing junior foreign policy wonks than about building war-winning leaders. These students have expressed their frustrations and fear that we're in danger of ceding what they called intellectual overmatch to Russia and China. I would note that it appears the Joint Staff seems to agree. They released a memo 18 months ago that called for renewed War College focus on lethality. These 2 professors, though, claim that this guidance has since been, quote, "lost in a maze of bureaucracy." Could you talk to me, Admiral, about your plans to implement the findings of that memo?
Certainly, thank you, and thanks for the discussion a couple of weeks ago. First, I'm a big fan of joint professional military education. And for me, and my experience at National War College and my interactions with the Naval War College as an example, the key for JPME is to go beyond the tactical to the operational and the strategic. I think that's where we need to center our war colleges going forward. There is an element of policy, but how does the military fit within the policy pieces of the diplomatic, informational, military, and economic? But the real power of the war colleges and JPME writ large is to ensure that we bridge that gap from the tactical to the strategic. So if confirmed and going forward, I would look forward to working with the service to discuss that to ensure that there's the appropriate focus on war fighting and lethality.
Thank you. Could I get your commitment to follow up on a progress report on that by May?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. You know, when I first ran for office, I guess it's almost 10 years ago now, a nice elderly lady asked me if I was the one who had gotten out of the Army not too long ago. And I said yes, and I was running for Congress now, and I said yes. And she said, "Why would you leave the country's most respected institution for the country's least respected institution?" I wish that wasn't the case about Congress, but I've always been proud that it is the case about our military. Therefore, I viewed with alarm the annual Reagan National Defense Survey, which recently found a staggering 25% collapse in American trust in the military. And in the past 11 months, my office has fielded hundreds of concerns from service members across the services who say they believe that senior DoD leadership has been politicized in inappropriate and unprofessional ways. Their complaints include, and these are their words, not mine, 1, counter-extremism training that draws blanket condemnation of troops who privately hold conservative views. 2, training to fight things like the weather rather than China's growing military. And 3, so-called diversity training that has taken on blatantly political, even racist tones, including forcing service members to segregate themselves by race or promoting based on skin color, sexual orientation, and gender rather than operational excellence and achievement. Do you think it's fair to say that some of these policies, which are quite controversial, have contributed to that 25% decline in trust in our military?
Sir, I too am disappointed and alarmed by that number. I read the same report that you did, and that's concerning to me as someone who's dedicated 37 years to this and take great pride in what we're able to do. I think the key issue here is what you expect of us, and that is that you expect us to remain apolitical and to provide our best military advice. I think that's the key issue, and everything we do needs to be revolved around that central concept.
Well, Admiral, what we've consistently heard from many of those service members who have reached out to us is that they feel they are being presented with highly politicized training modules. They voice their concerns or objections, and then their chain of command will accuse them of acting in a political fashion. So they find themselves in a catch-22. Let me give you just one example of something that seems a bit strange to me. Marine Base Quantico recently posted a job listing for a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer for a salary of $144,000 a year, more than triple the median household income in Arkansas. Also close to what a base commander makes. I mean, do you think that we should be paying $144,000 to a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer at Quantico? Is this the kind of thing that might cause Americans to lose confidence in the priorities of DoD leadership?
Don't have the context for in which that billet was advertised. I do think we need to have important discussions about things like that. To the pay scale, I really can't comment on what that job is being asked to do. But again, I think the idea that you need from us is to be apolitical. And I want to go back to something you mentioned in your preamble there, sir, if I could, and that was that the concern on the part of the members who have communicated with you that they could not voice their views. I think the role of commanders is to create that open dialogue and have that ability to discuss things, and that there should be no reprisals for that kind of thing. And so going forward, we need to make sure we have that environment, the safe environment where people can have that open dialogue and that discussion.
Yeah, my time's expired. I will just say that what we expect of you and all of the senior military leaders is to address these cultural challenges. We also have spoken before the hearing about my concerns on the surface Navy and its cultural challenge in the report that I released with Congressman Gallagher and a few other Navy veterans. We can write laws in this institution, we can pass budgets, but no organization can thrive and make real change without dynamic leadership. That's why they always said leadership was the most important element of combat power. So we're counting on you and other senior leaders to help address some of these cultural challenges and hopefully win back the quarter of the American people who said they've lost trust in our military. And that's what I expect to see, and that's what we'll be monitoring in the years ahead.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to reemphasize the line of questioning that Senator Kane began with, and that is nuclear command and control. We always talk about the triad. I think it's a quad. Without the modernization of nuclear command and control, and not only modernization, but ongoing modernization, because the cyber threat is constantly evolving. Without that modernization, the rest of the triad could be rendered useless and therefore not credible and therefore not a deterrent. So I hope you will focus very intensely on the upgrades necessary to command and control systems. I think you've said that that is your intention, but please reiterate it for me.
Yes, Senator, absolutely. What we see in the cyber domain across all of our weapon systems has to be addressed. And so we talk a lot about being able to defend our networks. The ultimate network to defend is the NC3 network, and we're going to have to be able to do that in cyber. So if confirmed, it would be a high priority of mine to continue the momentum started to do that.
Thank you. I just returned this morning from the Norwegian Embassy on a conference on the Arctic. And one of the issues that came up was the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. In 2007, the Russians, there's a famous picture of the Russians planting a Russian flag at the North Pole under the Arctic Ocean. And to me, it symbolizes our failure to be at the table when we're resolving disputes with regard to the maritime domain. Is it your professional military opinion that it would be in the national interest of this country to accede to the law of the sea treaty?
It is, Senator.
Thank you. And I hope the record will show how readily you answered that question. I didn't have to pry it out of you. I think it's very important, and I think it's something we should bring up before this body once again, because our national security is being compromised, whether it's the South China Sea or the Arctic or other areas in the maritime area. Now, one of your roles will be as the chair of the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, the JROC. And recently I was at a dinner with some prominent figures in the technology field, and they pointed out that because of the length of time it takes to develop our weapon systems, they are literally obsolete the day they go into service. In some cases, they're years out of date. I know that we're always focused in the procurement area on money and on cost, but talk to me about the importance of time. If the technology is advancing so fast today that if it takes a dozen years to develop a new airframe or a new maritime, a new ship or a new weapon system, we're sunk, not to use the naval term, but time has to be an essential part of this process.
Absolutely, sir. I'll just use a Navy term, speed to the fleet. You don't, as you say, you don't want to take forever to get it to the sailor. So I think there's several things that we need to do. First, although I would offer to you is, if confirmed, speed will be and urgency will be part of the JROC process. And in this, I believe I'm building on the great momentum that General Hyten and General Selva set for the JROC. I think one of the challenges, though, is that we're risk averse. And so that we need to consider whether and adopt a strategy, if you will, that will allow test a little and learn a lot. And if there's failure there, then we can
in briefings that I've been in, one of the reasons given for the speed with which the Chinese have achieved what they have in hypersonics is that they're willing to fail. Mm-hmm. They're willing to run tests and learn from failure, and we seem to be, as you say, risk averse and therefore much slower in our development process.
I would agree with you. That risk aversion, I think, was born of a period of time, perhaps in the late 90s, early 90s, when we didn't have any peer competitors. That's not the case now. So we have to be able to fail to learn faster. Failure doesn't mean malfeasance or laziness or any of that, but it means iterating and going faster.
One other area I want to hope you will emphasize is that I think, frankly, we've been slow on is directed energy. We have a very expensive missile defense infrastructure that's designed to hit a bullet with a bullet, and those bullets cost tens of millions of dollars. Do you believe that directed energy is a promising technology that should be pursued more aggressively?
I do, Senator. As you correctly point out, that's a terrible exchange ratio for us. And if we can get to the point where a drop of fuel means a bullet, that's where we need to be. So pursuit, if confirmed, pursuit of directed energy and some of the other technologies that we've talked about now would be high on my list. But that directed energy then would be folded into an integrated network of capabilities that we can bring to the fight.
But it's not going to happen unless somebody pushes it, and I hope that you'll be that person.
Aye, sir.
Thank you very much, Admiral.
Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Blackburn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Admiral Grady. We appreciate your time. I appreciated your phone call before Thanksgiving.
Yes, ma'am.
And we're grateful for your service. I want to talk with you a little bit about the role of the Vice Chairman within the Nuclear Posture Review. Mm-hmm. And in the past, the Joint Staff served in co-leadership roles with the SecDef, and presumably this was the way that it ensured the best military insight, intel insight, and advice available to make certain that that was a part of the analysis. And in this year's SASC NDAA, we included a codification of that practice for the Biden administration's first NPR. And of course, we're trying to push that on across the finish line at this point. So is the vice chairman a co-chair of the administration's ongoing NPR?
The vice chairman is an advisor to that process now.
Okay. And according to a Pentagon press briefing that occurred last month, the DoD will conclude its NPR early next year. Is that accurate?
I believe so.
Okay. And if confirmed, do you believe that you will have adequate time to contribute to the NPR?
If confirmed, I believe I will have an opportunity to help shape the NPR going forward. I've had a little bit of that opportunity as the commander of the Naval Forces piece, but I look forward to being part of that process going forward.
Do you think that we should change the pace and the time of the NPR and do it more frequently?
I think it should be conditions-based. I think the timing and tempo of many of the policy reviews seems adequate to me right now. However, the world gets a vote in those kind of things, and I suspect that should there be large-scale changes in the international security environment, we would then go back and look at the seminal documents that we have that guide our thinking.
And do you think the aggressiveness of China in this field, the work that they are doing in hypersonics, the aggressiveness of Russia, would mean that we would need to change time and tempo?
It could. I think that as the two peer competitors, particularly in the nuclear space, that we have to spend a lot of time focusing on their intentions and what they're doing going forward. And certainly deterrence, as an example, with two nuclear competitors is different than that with one, which is why the current NPR that is coming forward is such an important document, and I think well-timed based on what we're seeing with China.
Well, I do think that it is. And when we talk about terms like no first use and sole purpose, that enters into that. And it is of concern that our nuclear capabilities are at their lowest since the early 60s, when we first began fielding a triad, and all of the systems that comprise our nuclear forces are decades past their intended design lives, and we are currently the only nuclear-armed country without the capability to produce a single new nuclear weapon. So do you believe the current program of record is sufficient to support the full modernization of our nuclear infrastructure?
I do, and I thank the committee's support for that as we work for our way forward through modernizing the nuclear triad and all of the associated infrastructure that goes with it. So I thank you for your support on that. And
well, talking about that associated infrastructure, what are your concerns with respect to DoD, but then also respect to NNSA and their capabilities?
And NSA are fantastic partners within the DOE with the Department of Defense. They're kind of our battle buddies in this effort to modernize our nuclear triad. And so ensuring that we work closely together, that we're integrated in as we move forward to ensure that the infrastructure that supports that nuclear triad keeps pace. That will be, if confirmed, will be an important relationship that I would hope to seek with NNSA and with the larger nuclear enterprise.
I have a couple of more questions for you on this, on infrastructure and recapitalization, modernization, but in the interest of time, I will submit those to you for written answers.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Admiral Grady, for being here today. Congratulations on your nomination. Thank you. So in August, a U.S. drone strike killed 10 Afghan civilians, including 7 children and 1 employee of a U.S.-based NGO, after water containers were mistaken for potential explosives. Just a few weeks ago, you probably saw, the New York Times revealed that in 2019, the military covered up an airstrike that killed approximately 70 women and children in Syria and was flagged as a potential war crime. Unfortunately, these are far from isolated instances. Independent watchdog groups estimate that in the past 20 years, U.S. air and drone strikes have killed thousands of innocent civilians in places like Yemen, Syria, and Somalia. And the true toll may never be known because of the difficulty of accurate reporting and the military's consistent underreporting. So let me just start with kind of a baseline here, Admiral. Would you agree that the rates of civilian casualties are unacceptably high?
Senator, I would agree that civilian casualties under any circumstances are totally unacceptable and that you should demand from us better.
I appreciate that answer very much, Admiral. You know, but here's the thing. Despite this terrible loss of innocent life, no meaningful reform or change has been implemented. For years, DOD has turned a blind eye to civilian casualties and has also failed to distribute ex gratia money that Congress has authorized for survivors. This is just wrong. And I don't know how we can continue to view a system that kills thousands of innocent civilians and simply accept it as a cost of doing business. Any system that does that, in my view, is fundamentally broken. Now, the New York Times also reported that DOD investigates reports of civilian casualties only when, and this is the quote, there is a potential for high media attention or concern with outcry from the local community or government. So let me ask you this, Admiral. Would you also agree that DOD investigating only high-profile or potentially newsworthy cases of civilian casualties is a barrier to meaningful accountability?
I think the issue that you raise on accountability is one that you should hold us to the highest standard for. Yeah, I'll give you my personal experience in that. As a strike group commander for 10 months in the Arabian Gulf, we dropped 1 million pounds of bombs. I had to explain every single one of those and whether they met ground commander's intent. That level of accountability is something that you should demand from us.
And do you believe, based on that, that reform is needed to reduce the rates of civilian casualties caused by U.S. military operations?
I think every civilian casualty is a tragedy, but it's very dangerous and hard work that we do, and we apply lessons learned each time to try to get better to forestall that. But again, hold us accountable and we'll fix it.
Well, I appreciate that, Admiral, because that is the point. We need to get better on this, and it is about accountability. I've already asked this committee to investigate operations that result in civilian casualties and to suggest reforms that can prevent these tragedies. But you don't have to wait for us to act. The Pentagon has an opportunity to do exactly that without a specific mandate from Congress. So it can and should start that today. And I look forward to working with you on this.
Amen.
Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Tillis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Grady, thank you for being here. Congratulations on your nomination. I want to talk a little bit about European posture with the circumstances in Ukraine or with Russia near Ukraine right now. It seems like we've got a hot spot there and a real clear and present threat. I know that we've worked on improving our European posture since the Russian invasion of Ukraine back in 2014, and I think we've got more work to do. We have the multi-domain task force in Germany, and I think we're reestablishing B Corps over in Poland. But what more do we need to do in terms of pushing resources in that region that seems to be continually under threat? And kind of curious about your anti-access aerial denial. What other priorities should we place there? And I guess in answering that question, we've got priorities in other points of the globe. So, you know, how are you going to balance scarce resources? What would be your priorities when you're confirmed, and with respect to European posture, but also other threats that are equally concerning?
the challenges in the European area of operations are significant, as you've pointed out, sir. And so I think the first thing we need to think about is working with our allies and partners there and leveraging the great strength that is the NATO alliance. We're certainly stronger together in that regard. The resource challenge that you discuss is strong, significant. Certainly the pacing threat is in China, and we need to then balance how we're going to address our presence and posture in Indo-PACOM and the challenges there with how we're going to balance those in Europe. So again, I think the key here will be a threat-based and resource-informed discussion, but then leveraging the flexibility and maneuvering that we have as a military to leave us options to move quickly where we need to be. And I think a big part of that is working with our allies and partners. You asked me a question about A2AD. These challenges are significant. We could talk for a long time, I suppose, at a higher classification level in the Western Pacific, as an example. But to your point, in Europe, the Eastern Mediterranean is also a very challenging area to work, as is the Strait of Hormuz. And so as the vice chairman and working within the JROC, it'll be a priority of mine to bring those and close those A2AD gaps and bring those capabilities to the force as quickly as possible in all of the AORs around the country. The East Med is an example to your question about EUCOM.
I want to talk a little bit about NATO. NATO 2030, there's some promise in there. They seem to reference China as a threat that our NATO allies and partners should take seriously. But what is your sense of NATO working with them? I get the sense, I have the pleasure of serving as co-chair of the Senate NATO Observer Group, and the sense that I get is that we still do not have a complete consensus among some of our NATO allies with respect to the threat of Russia. What can you tell me that would give me optimism that there is a growing sense of resolve that we all need to act and recognize the threat?
In my dealings with my NATO partners, and I'll go back to my time as the Sixth Fleet Commander when I was Strike Force NATO, I thought there was a growing realization, particularly of the Russian threat and the challenges that we would need to meet as a NATO alliance and the strength of the transatlantic alliance that would be important to that. And to your question about a growing understanding of China and the threats that posed, I similarly felt the same. And so my dialogues at my level, and have confirmed going forward with the vice chairman of the UK and France in particular, will be to talk about what China is doing in their part of the world. Certainly, if you look at the One Belt, One Road initiative and challenges in Europe, or if you look at the 5G and Huawei and how that challenges what we want to do with our allies and partners, that growing realization is there, and I'm pretty confident that we can work together to meet those challenges.
Thank you. I have some other questions I'll submit for the record, but thank you. I look forward to supporting your nomination.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. We are approaching a vote at 11:30, so I'd ask my colleagues to adhere to the 5-minute limit as much as possible. Senator Bruno, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Grady, normally I start each nomination hearing with a series of questions related to a nominee's fitness for service. However, based on the severity of the ongoing water contamination crisis at Pearl Harbor, I'm going to submit those questions for the record. I'm not sure how familiar you or my colleagues are with the Red Hill Fuel Storage Facility, but it is a huge complex that I liken to the Hoover Dam. Red Hill has 20 massive underground fuel storage tanks built into the side of a mountain that holds 250 million gallons of fuel to support military operations across the Indo-Pacific. These tanks serve as a strategic war reserve in the event of crisis. Red Hill sits 100 feet directly above Oahu's aquifer, which is the source of drinking water for all of Honolulu and the surrounding area, threatening the safety of our clean drinking water. While there have been ongoing issues with leaks at Red Hill since 2014, a series of recent preventable accidents have led to the contamination of the Navy's water system and put the community at risk. At this moment, Around 100,000 military service members, their families, contractors, and other residents are impacted. Over 2,800 families have been displaced to temporary housing only weeks before the holidays, and thousands of others are being forced to use bottled water. This is not just a short-term matter to resolve the drinking water problem, which the Navy must do expeditiously, but also a long-term question about the department's plans for strategic fuel storage. On Monday, I joined Governor Ige and the Hawaii delegation in calling for the Navy to immediately suspend operations at Red Hill, while they confront and remedy this crisis. Governor Ige then directed the Navy to cease operations at Red Hill and defuel all the tanks. The Department of Defense needs to provide answers to the citizens of Hawaii and the nation as a whole about how it can safely protect the aquifer while still storing the required fuel reserve for national security, even if that means ultimately moving the fuel elsewhere. In the past week, I have spoken with the Secretary of the Navy, the Chief of Naval Operations, and the Commander of Indo-PACOM multiple times about how to resolve this crisis. It is paramount that the Navy understands that Oahu needs safe drinking water. That is the top priority, and I will continue to work with the congressional delegation and the governor to do whatever is necessary to make that happen. Admiral, once confirmed, I'd like a commitment from you that Red Hill will be a top priority, both solving the short-term contamination issue and developing a credible long-term plan for the storage or for the strategic war reserve needs. I would also like your commitment to prioritize restoring the community's confidence in the military. You can imagine the community's confidence has been badly shaken by how the military has handled this water contamination crisis. Indo-PACOM is our country's priority theater, and DoD's budgeting and infrastructure decisions need to more strongly reflect that reality. Admiral, can I get your commitment that if confirmed that you will make Red Hill now and going forward a priority, a top priority?
Yes, ma'am. The safety of our citizens, our Navy families, our military families is of the highest importance. And you have my commitment that if confirmed, I will work with my very close colleague, Chris Aquilino and Sam Paparo, to ensure that we move forward appropriately, both first and primarily on the safety of our citizens, but then on the logistics implications going forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rona. Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Admiral, good to see you again. I appreciated our meeting, and I look forward to supporting your confirmation quickly. Let me just begin. Why do you think the White House left this seat open? My understanding is they had names back in January for the American people. I'm quite concerned. We don't have a vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We have all these challenges that we're facing as a nation. Russia is looking like it's possibly going to invade Ukraine. Xi Jinping is very aggressive towards Taiwan, and we don't even have a vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Why do you think it took so long to put your name up before this committee?
Sure, I'm not privy to the process by which the nomination worked its way through the process. I'll just say I'm happy to be sitting here now, and if confirmed, look forward to working with you.
Well, I think it's part of a broader trend, a dereliction of duty trend as it relates to the military and this White House, this president. They don't seem to prioritize the military. The vice chairman position's open right now. That didn't have to happen. Unforced error doesn't certainly help our national security. And I've been raising this issue a lot. The president's budget does double-digit increases in terms of almost every federal agency, with the exception of two. Two get cuts, significant cuts, if you keep it for inflation-adjusted cuts: the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security. Dead last. Again, there's not a prioritization of the military. What do you think that Xi Jinping or Putin see when they see a budget requests like this from this president's White House? You think that that gives them encouragement that we're cutting our defense spending?
I think that as we look at their budgets, they look at ours, and they try and attempt to draw conclusions from that on our way forward.
In your personal opinion, do you think at this moment in time, cutting our defense budget is a good idea for national security or a bad idea, in your personal opinion?
I think that there are many significant national security challenges around the world, and that you need a Department of Defense budget that was able to meet those challenges, not just now, but going forward.
Does cutting the department's budget do that,
I think
in your personal opinion?
Yeah, there are risks and challenges there that that we need to face, and that we need to have the appropriate funding level to do that.
You're not answering my question with respect. Do you think that cutting the defense budget does that? Let me, just a yes or no, personal opinion.
I think that stable and predictable and adequate funding is important, and that it needs to keep pace with the threat and inflation.
This doesn't, does it?
This is challenging.
This doesn't. Let me just be more specific. This budget and the request from the Navy actually shrinks the fleet. Commissions 4 new ships, retires 8. Do you think shrinking the U.S. Navy fleet is something that Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party would welcome or would be against? The U.S. Navy fleet shrinking, which is what this budget by this president does. You think? What do you think the Chinese think of that?
I think the Chinese look at an isolated shrinking of the budget as a positive thing.
Yes, I do too. Well, fortunately, this committee rebuked the president and others, and we put forward what the National Security Commission, bipartisan by the way, recommended to increase defense spending 3 to 5% per year, real budget, a real increase, inflation adjusted. That's what this committee responsibly did. And we certainly hope that as we look forward to appropriating that we'll do that. Let me ask one final question, then I'll have a number for you that I'm going to submit for the record. There has been a dramatic, and you and I talked about this, trust in the military in terms of a decline, actually plummeting. The Reagan National Defense Survey says that for the first time ever, a minority of Americans, only 45%, report having a great deal of trust and confidence in the military. This is down from 70% in 2018, 3-year drop. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, first, I'm disappointed to see that number.
So am I.
Someone who served for 37 years, take great pride in what I do and what our servicemen do every day. That's disturbing. I think the key for us to help combat that is to be as transparent in what we do and as apolitical as we possibly can be.
Let me ask one final question. The Undersecretary of Defense, number three position in the Pentagon, he said one of his priorities in his confirmation hearing was to, quote, stamp out systemic racism within the ranks. Do you think the military is a systemically racist institution in your experience? And do you think that having senior officials say that kind of thing is actually one of the things that undermines trust?
I think it's really important that we have discussions about anything that challenges the safe and secure working environment for our force. That's a commander's business to do that, and racism is part of that. I'll give you my personal experience. Personal experience. Every time I do a fleet unit visit, whether it's an airplane, a squadron, or a submarine, I ask these questions. And we'd work really hard to have that dialogue, that important dialogue that we need to have about racism. And we all agree that there is no place for it in our military.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll submit more records or questions for the record.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, Admiral, and congratulations on your nomination, and thank you for being here today and offering some of your thoughts. Admiral, in advance testimony, you expressed concern with both state and non-state actors' ability to successfully execute large-scale influence operations against the United States and its partners, and certainly I share those concerns, and we have a lot of evidence of that on a almost daily basis. So I want to kind of hear your views on organizing our information warfare capabilities. This is a wide-scoping issue, I understand, but information clearly is a domain and a warfighting function with a very strong human dimension to it as well. But we should never exceed the need for some overarching guidance, planning, and authorities when it comes to all this. So my question to you is, would the joint force be more effective and by extension perhaps more resilient if information warfare fell under a single entity such as a functional component command?
Yeah. First, I agree with you, sir, on the challenge that information warfare presents to us in the modern realities of warfare going forward. And winning and dominating in the information space is going to be just as important as in the military or the diplomatic or the lawfare or the economic. And so going forward, we're going to have to do and work very hard to ensure that happens. I think the best response from an information perspective, though, is that, to answer your question directly, is that it should be integrated across what all of our, we'll use the COCOMs as an example, it has to be integrated in everything they do from the ground up. It can't be something that's bolted on the bottom. My discussions with my colleagues who are fleet commanders or who are combatant commanders now, I think they get that. And so I think as the vice chairman, if confirmed, it would be my job to help encourage that integration baked in from the bottom as equally as important as what we do from the tactical to the strategic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as we look at malign influence in information warfare, there are certainly vulnerabilities in governance, and that can turn some of our neighbors and our allies into targets of opportunity for financially motivated cyber criminals. State-sponsored actors, certainly linked to China, to Russia, and Iran, are conducting extensive cyber espionage operations, information operations. So my question for you is, do you believe that security assistance should include cyber security assistance to help our partners protect their critical infrastructure or to enhance their resiliency against this sophisticated information warfare that we're seeing across the globe?
Yes, Senator. First, you are stronger together with our allies and partners, one of those great competitive advantages that we have. And so in the cyber realm, then, working together within cyber to meet those threats that you have pointed out is incredibly important. And so I do think that there are venues for us to help and to learn from them as well in the cyber domain going forward.
Great. Well, thank you. Discussion of great power competition tends to emphasize capabilities and resources that prepare for potentially armed conflict. But I would like you to address a little bit how we would employ our military instrument of power against a broad spectrum of non-military threats. We've already talked about cyber and information warfare. But I believe that irregular warfare architecture represents perhaps a proactive shaping process through competition and generates some options if tensions escalate or if deterrence fails. So my question for you is, how should the joint force be competing actively in this environment while deterring escalation, shaping theaters in a way that will help us should deterrence fail?
So I think there's several elements to that. One, working with our allies and partners is absolutely critical. So that's one. Two, there's a value to being there and to being able to work with them as situations arise. Things like theater security cooperation, which allows us to train together, to exercise together. Things like the IMET program that allow us to share best practices and democratic values are important. And then to your point about boots on the ground, perhaps I'll use the Seabees as an example. They do fantastic work around the world, helping share those cultural values and help us learn about the battle space that we're going to operate in. And then at the higher end, irregular warfare, whether it be SOF or something else, is absolutely critical to everything we do. And it's across all phases, from pre-conflict to post-conflict.
Well, very good. And When I served in the Navy Reserve, I served in a CB battalion, so I appreciate you bringing up the CBs.
Sir.
Thank you again for your answers, Admiral. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Scott, please.
I'm going to let Senator Hawley take my time.
Senator Hawley, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Scott. That's kind of you. Admiral, I want to come back to something you said earlier. You talked about China being the pacing threat, Indo-PACOM being the pacing theater, and that, with that in mind, let me just point out that the threat of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan continues to grow rapidly, but the resources that are available to the department to counter and deter that threat are not. Given that, is it fair to say that DoD needs to be doing less in lower priority theaters so it can use its scarce resources to do more, to do what we need to do to deter China in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, that gets to that resource balance question that we were talking about, sir. And so certainly if the pacing threat is in the Indo-PACOM theater, then working with the combatant commander, Admiral Aquilino, my close colleague, it will be important to provide him the resources he needs to help shape that environment and make those priority-based discussions based on the threat.
Are you concerned that the Global Posture Review released last week doesn't name a single region where DoD plans to do less?
Not part of the process to build the Global Posture Review. What I do like about the Global Posture Review is that it provides a disciplined framework to have those priority-based discussions that you talked about. And so I think that's a great promise of the GPR going forward.
So you're not concerned is the answer to my question?
I think there's room for us to work within the discipline process that they lay out to have further discussions about those priorities, challenges that you referenced.
Well, I just want to say that I'm very concerned by the Global Posture Review. The overwhelming message, I think, sent by the review is that our posture abroad doesn't require any changes at all. The review doesn't recommend any major changes. I think that's a big mistake. We cannot continue to do what we're doing and adequately deter China in Asia. Let me ask you about our force planning construct in the 2018 NDS. It shifted that construct, that the NDS shifted focus from maintaining our ability to fight and win 2 regional wars to fighting and winning a single war against a great power. Senator Rounds was asking about this earlier. Do you agree with the force planning construct used in the 2018 NDS?
I think as we work on the NDS and if confirmed, I look forward to being part of the next NDS. I think we're going to have to look really hard at that force planning construct. It's conditions-based, it's threat-based, and the situation, as I say, the world gets a vote, and we're going to have to look at what that means with 2 peer competitors and how we're going to adjust that.
Well, let me ask it to you this way. The Assistant Secretary of Defense, Carlin, wrote to me earlier this year, I'm quoting her now, "I believe that the force planning construct should prioritize and focus on China unless and until the security environment changes dramatically." She goes on, "The threat China poses to Taiwan should be a priority for the force planning construct." Do you agree with Dr. Carlin?
Haven't had a chance to sit down with Dr. Carlin to talk about that, but I do agree that the pacing threat and the challenges that we most face is in the Indo-PACOM region.
With regard to the force planning construct, Dr. Carlin also wrote, and I'm quoting her again, "While the U.S. military will invariably need to juggle other challenges simultaneously, it would need to reprioritize those should a conflict with China arise." Do you agree with that the U.S. military will need to reprioritize other challenges, for instance, in Europe, should a conflict with China arise so that we can focus on
Absolutely. If conflict arises, we're going to have to provide all that we can to win that conflict.
And you think that China should be the priority even in the event of simultaneous conflicts?
Again, conditions-based.
Well, I don't know what that means, with all due respect, Admiral. You said that several times now, and frankly, you're evading my questions. You haven't given me a straight answer on any of my questions yet. I've asked you about the Global Posture Review repeatedly. I've asked you about the 2018 NDS. So far, you haven't answered me on any of them. So let's try for a yes or a no. Let me just back up and let's try again. The 2018 NDS, the force planning construct used in that, shifting away from multiple conflicts to winning one great power conflict. Do you agree with that, yes or no?
I agree that it needs to be reviewed.
So that sounds like you don't agree with it currently, and you think that it's subject to revision. Is that right?
So what I offer, Senator, is that going forward, if confirmed as the Vice Chairman, I'll have an ability to help contribute to that dialogue as we look at the force planning construct going forward.
Well, I'd say this, if I can't get any further clarity from you on this, and if your position is in fact that you want to abandon the 2018 NDS force posture, you won't be confirmed with my vote. Let me ask you about the situation in Taiwan. Taiwan needs to be able to field cost-effective and resilient asymmetrical defense capabilities as quickly as possible in order to strengthen their deterrence against a Chinese invasion. Do you agree with that?
I agree that asymmetric tools that they can bring to that fight would be of great value.
My time has expired. I'm going to have a number of more questions for you, Admiral, for the record, and frankly, I'm disappointed in your answers today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. Now let me recognize via WebEx Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Admiral. I appreciate it very much. I also enjoyed our conversation that we had before Thanksgiving, and congratulations on your nomination. And I'm sure you're going to be confirmed, sir, without any problems. With that, I'd like to know a little bit. First of all, we do an awful lot of the training in West Virginia, and we have had a tremendous opportunity to work with special ops, and we're hoping, as you're all looking into that some of the other branches of service can use or look at our state from the standpoint of the effectiveness and the cost effectiveness, especially, and a location being so close to DC. And I don't know if you've had a chance to visit some of the operations we have. If not, we'd like to bring you and show you what we have been able to develop here.
Sir, I have not had the opportunity to visit the facilities that you discussed, but if confirmed, would look forward to spending some time with those troops.
We'd love to get you out as quickly as we could, so that'd be great. I was pleased to read about the focus you have towards interoperability. I know we touched on it briefly, and this has been in your advanced questions. Interoperability with our allies is something that I'm sure that you spent quite a bit of time designing, implementing as Commander of U.S. Fleet Forces. Can you describe some of those experiences and tell us how you plan to expand them with all of our allies?
Yes, Senator, thanks. The key issue for me as the Fleet Forces Commander or as Sixth Fleet and Strike Force NATO was to build interoperability so that we could fight together, but not interoperability for interoperability's sake, but interoperability for integration so that we could work better, we could fight better together immediately. Interoperability is one thing, integration is where we need to go and work and train together. So if confirmed as the Vice Chairman, it will be a high priority of me to work with our allies and partners on interoperability as it leads to integration and then our ability to fight and win together.
Sir, also Cyber Command, Space Command are two of the combatant commands that influence nearly every weapon and support system in our inventory. Tell me, if you will, your plan to resource each of them as the challenges and capabilities in these domain increases.
Yeah, sir, thank you. And working within the space domain is absolutely critical and a very high priority. It underpins everything we do as a military, just as our military underpins what we need to do in space. So if confirmed as the Vice Chairman, space as a domain, and it's important to recognize that it is a domain like everything else, will be a high priority for us, for me going forward, if confirmed.
I'm going to ask you just a hypothetical question because I know it might be a little bit out of your domain, but with what we see going on in China and Taiwan and the South China Sea, and also what we see going on now with Russia, Ukraine, do you have any comments or any thoughts on that would be kind of helpful in our deliberations?
Yes, Senator, thank you. I think if you start with Russia in Crimea and with Ukraine, it's a very dangerous and destabilizing situation that we're working our way through. It's important for us to ensure that we work with our NATO partners and continue to recognize the challenges that are faced by Russian activity in that area of the world, and then remain rock solid in our commitment to Ukrainian sovereignty, to Ukrainian self-determination, and their larger goals of ultimately perhaps moving forward with alliances and whatnot. I think in the Western Pacific, the challenges are equally important. As we have discussed, that's the pacing threat in the Pacific and in Indo-PACOM, and we're going to have to meet those on a daily basis. Again, two peer competitors we're going to have to balance those going forward.
Very quickly on the other one, sir. As a commander, I'm interested to hear about any concerns you may have in logistical capabilities or the capacity to surge necessary combat power to any part of the region, but if need, in regions that if we needed to combat a North Korean or a near-peer aggression, what would be your thoughts on that and how do you think we can meet those concerns?
Yes, sir. I think contested logistics is an incredibly important part of our theory of the fight going forward. I think that's why we recognize that it is one of the 4 pillars of the new joint warfighting construct. And so contested logistics, whether it allows us to fight in Korea or in the Indo-Pacific or even in Europe, is going to be incredibly important to what we do. We're pretty good at logistics, but there's room to improve, and that's why it's such an important pillar of the joint warfighting construct.
Let me thank you again for your service and also your continued willingness to serve, and I look forward to voting for your confirmation, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Manchin. Senator Scott, please.
Well, first off, Admiral Grady, it's nice to see a Navy guy do well.
Yes, sir.
So congratulations on your nomination, and thanks for your willingness to serve. So I think we talked about this the other day. My top concern is both Communist China and Russia. And so my first question is, without disclosing any classified information, what examples can you provide that show that this administration is doing everything it can to prepare the U.S. to deter and potentially defeat these adversaries in the field, in any field they may challenge us in?
Yes, sir. I think a really good example of deterrence is our ability to work with our allies and partners in a very robust exercise and training series. And so I'll just use my most recent example where we did the large-scale exercise within the Department of Navy. That was the first global large-scale exercise that we've done that crossed the spectrum, that crossed the globe from Indo-PACOM all the way into Europe. And so that demonstration of credible combat capability on a globally integrated basis, which was the value of LSE, I think is a really good example of how we can continue to press deterrence and to demonstrate that credible combat capability that underpins that deterrence.
Thanks. Do you agree that we've seen Communist China significantly increase its use of aggressive military tactics since President Biden took office? And do you agree that Communist China's behaviors, especially what we're watching in Taiwan, have grown more bold this year?
I think Communist China's activities have been relatively consistent over the last few years and are certainly, and particularly the rhetoric, is certainly something that we have to recognize and address.
As we talked the other day, I've introduced the Taiwan Invasion Prevention Act, which would eliminate the ambiguity. It basically says we're going to defend Taiwan. Would one, do you agree with that? And two, would it make your job easier if it was clear exactly what your obligations are?
I think that the One China policy, the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 communiques, and the 6 assurances, I think that's done a really good job of maintaining the status quo, which is peace, which is solving the challenge in Taiwan on a not a unilateral way, and so that status quo is important. Going forward, a policy change, I think, would be one that would have to be based on the rhetoric and the risk that China is presenting. And if confirmed as the Vice Chairman, I look forward to helping shape that and shape our thinking on that as we press forward.
Do you believe General Secretary Xi fears a U.S. reaction from the U.S., with regard to his continuing aggression towards Taiwan and even other countries in Asia?
I think that I can't speak for what's in his head, but I suspect that the credible and capable military that's forward under Admiral Aquilino's leadership is one that should give him pause. That we are prepared and positioned to do what we need to.
For decades, the U.S. has reserved the right to preemptively use our nuclear weapons in the event our national security requires it. Do you believe we should keep that option open or abandon it?
I think that options are always good, and keeping all options on the table for the president is important.
Do you have any concerns about China's focus on their and success in their hypersonic missiles?
Absolutely. It's an area that my predecessor discussed at great length, and they are moving very, very quickly in hypersonics, and a very challenging weapon system, and one in which we need to keep pace, if not overmatch.
So what do you think when Congress doesn't pass the National Defense Authorization Act and continues to do continuing resolutions rather than pass a budget? How does it impact our military readiness?
That's a great question, sir. The continuing resolutions are super challenging, as you know. They eliminate our ability to move the flexibility. They stop new starts, our ability to invest in new weapon systems. They have a human cost that goes with them. Let me go back to the one I just mentioned because it synchronizes with your question, and that is a CR would prevent us from advancing on new initiatives like the Army and the Air Force program on hypersonics. So CRs are very destructive and so and challenging for the service to work forward and work through.
So how many ships do you think the Navy needs to be able to guarantee freedom of the seas for ourselves and our allies and our partners?
Yeah, first, I appreciate the law that says 355. That's important. I understand that. Presence matters, capability matters, but so does capacity matters. And so I think there's this balance between capacity and capability as we seek to meet the law of 355. And so going forward, we'll try to work to get to the 355 because that's what the law says. But in the meantime, as we work to get there and try to get there as fast as we can, we have the balance, capability and capacity. There's some other things that we can bring to the table in addition to the capacity piece.
Thanks, Admiral. Thanks, Chair Reed.
Thank you very much, Senator Scott. We have 4 individuals on the WebEx, but we also have a vote. So I will, at this point, Admiral, recess for 10 minutes so that I can vote, and also that I can allow my colleagues to have a chance to question you. So the committee stands in recess. Let me call the hearing back to order and recognize Senator Rosen via WebEx. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Chairman Reed and Ranking Member Inhofe. And for holding this hearing, and I'd really like to thank Admiral Grady for meeting with me recently, for your lifetime of service, and of course your willingness to continue to serve. And I wrote this down from your opening statement. I really liked it when you said stronger families means a stronger fleet. I think that is really a terrific quote, and I may use that from time to time, and I will credit you with that, Admiral. But I want to talk a little bit about cybersecurity now. As we discussed in our last meeting last month, cyber attacks are becoming one of the central security threats to the U.S. and, of course, to all of our partners. Our allies are essential to ensuring U.S. cybersecurity because we rely on them to do threat hunting, enable early warning, to harden our own collective defenses. And as you well know, cyber defense is part of NATO's core task of collective defense. So given the rising threats of cyber attacks from both state and non-state actors, NATO efforts to protect allied networks and enhance resilience across the alliance, well, it's just more critical than ever, which is why I raised this subject when I met with NATO leadership in Brussels just before Thanksgiving. So, Admiral Grady, what do you see as the significant cyber threats the NATO alliance is facing? And can you specifically describe the cyber threat our European allies face from Russia, and how, if confirmed, you would advise and support our allies in combating this cyber aggression?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Cyber is a domain that is increasingly active, increasingly contested, and increasingly competitive. And I think for our NATO allies, they recognize that. And so working together with them to face those challenges in this increasingly competitive domain is important. We tend to think about warfare as something that has a start point and an end point, and I think cyber is one that tells us that there's a lot happening in the gray zone that we have to think about even before conflict starts. And indeed, conflict could kick off in cyber before anything else. I think another piece of the cyber challenge that we face is how we work with within the whole of government and with industry. And so even in our own country, we have to look at our attacks on meatpacking plants and railroads and those kind of things to know that we have to be good partners, certainly with our allies and partners in NATO and beyond, but of course with our industrial-based partners and the rest of society, because that is in fact what's happening now in the gray zone world that we live in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This is an area that is going to become an increasing threat to all of us around the world. And so we really have to think about our cyber readiness, because our nation is really grappling with the aftermath of unprecedented cyber attacks. In the U.S., we're expected to face a shortage of 3.4 million skilled technical workers next year. Those workers help us to address these threats. There are particularly large gaps in cybersecurity. DoD continues to face challenges addressing requirements for certain key skill areas, such as those in the cyber and STEM fields. And so to help address the shortfall, inspire future generations of talent, last year's NDA, Senator Browns, Peters, Blackburn, and I introduced a bipartisan bill to help our junior ROTC young men and women have a STEM training and education track. So that's great. And this year's NDAA, again, I worked with Senator Blackburn to create a civilian cyber reserve, which will also help address cyber defense personnel needs. So, Admiral, if confirmed, how will you recruit and train personnel in these critical cybersecurity and STEM field, networking, hardware, software, all of it, so that we can really surge up and address these challenges that we know are going to be increasing day after day?
Yes, Senator, and thank you for your leadership on that initiative. Just a quick shout out on the JROTC and how important that is for the health of the force going forward. And then the STEM education you and I talked about, how critical that is. And the key element of that is getting to to our youngsters sooner than later is important. You and I talked about that. Concepts like a civilian cyber reserve, you and I talked about this. In my view, if you're willing to serve your country, if you can pass the security clearance, but you may not look like me, I don't care. If you can come and you can serve and you can and you can help us win in cyber, whether as in the civilian cyber reserve or some other form, we need to encourage that, because that's an area that we know we have to win in, and we know our adversaries are throwing a lot at it, and we have to outpace that.
Well, thank you. I want to be sure that the DoD maintains our technological superiority, and I'm going to do everything I can to help enforce that, grow that with you. So thank you. I see my time is up, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Tuberville, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Save the best for last. Thank you, Admiral, for being here, and your wife and your service. I'm excited about you being in this position. I think you'll bring a lot to who we are and what we are. I hear about all these our rockets and our tanks and all that. I came from a team atmosphere of 40 years, and I've been all around the world since I've had this job now for 12 months, and I've seen how dangerous it is. And if we're going to survive, not just our country, but the world, our military is going to have to do it for us. And it's not all the bells and whistles, it's the Joes and Janes. And my concern is, how do we build that best military? How do we build the values and morals and educate these young men and women? Because we're finding less and less that obviously that we will take in the military. And what we have total, I think, close to 2.5 million reservist active duty. I just want to get your thoughts on that. I'd like what you told me back when we met about drug testing kids. We're becoming more of a liberal society in things that we do, but we cannot allow that to creep into our military, because what they do means life and death, to themselves, to people around them, and also the survival of who we are, the free world. So I hope you would bring, and I know you will bring, a lot of that to the Joint Chiefs, to let that pass on down from the people that you work with. So talk a little bit about, structuring, our military from this point on. we've got a great military. I think there's some things that we need to maybe correct, but we still got to build that fighting machine.
Yes, sir. You and I talked at great length about how X's and O's are important, but Johnny and Joe and Jane are more important.
Right.
And so the center of the universe, our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, Marine, Coast Guardsmen, Guardians, it's important that we don't forget that that's what it is all about, and setting them up for success to win and to not go into that fair fight is absolutely critical. You and I also talked about the sailors and the servicemen that we're getting into the Navy now. And as I told you, sir, I'm super impressed with who we get now. They're different than when you and I were growing up, but they're just as good. And I'm supremely confident that we can ensure that they stay that way going forward. You know, drug testing is a really important policy. It is a very successful policy. We have a zero tolerance for that kind of thing, and that will continue so that we can maintain that lethal, credible warfighting edge that you expect us to have going forward, built on the center of the universe, our service members.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I know you'll do a great job. Look forward to being a huge part of what we do and working with you for the next few years. And by the way, Merry Christmas. It's almost here. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Turnbull. Admiral, thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your 40 years of service, you and your Christine and your family. And I look forward to your speedy confirmation. With that, I will adjourn the hearing.
Thank you, sir.